sky was a bleeding red. Broken ships littered the horizon like ancient bones. Smoke coiled into the burnt orange clouds, and the ground sizzled beneath the weight of plasma-scorched metal. Rain hissed as it hit the fractured hulls, slicing down like razors, a storm, bred from chemical rot and war wreckage. Jarn Cross stumbled over a beam, still glowing at its edges. His boots were soaked in engine coolant and ash. His oxygen mask flickered yellow, low reserves. He didn't care. "Signal's close," he muttered, tapping the cracked interface on his wrist. A weak pulse. Still alive. He squinted through the sleet. There, half buried under twisted steel and sand-blasted cables, was a glimpse of shimmering silver. A ceremonial robe. Torn, burned at the hem, and soaked with blood. Damn, he dropped to one knee. The body was crushed beneath a collapsed beam. She was motionless, barely breathing. Her skin glowed faintly with a violet hue, and her dark hair was matted to her forehead, sticky with blood and rain. A noble crest shimmered weakly on her collar. House Virelai, the highborn of the Empire. She wasn't just any alien. She was one of them. Jarn hesitated for only a breath. Then he ripped off his gloves and wedged himself under the wreckage. "Come on, don't you die on me!" The beam screamed as he levered it aside. His muscles tore with every inch. Sparks danced across his visor. The moment it shifted, she gasped. A raw, ragged sound, and her fingers twitched. Alive! He slid his arms under her and pulled. She was lighter than expected, but her skin was scorching, like holding fire. "Stay with me." Her eyes fluttered open. They were searing gold, pupils like twin suns, and filled with something between fury and fear. But then, just for a moment, they softened, the glow fading. She passed out. Later, when the emergency evac drone came and medtechs strapped her into a stasis pod, Jarn sat slumped against a boulder, drenched in ash and rain. His arms ached, his head pounded. The medic approached him, her expression unreadable. "You pulled a highborn from a death trial, Cross. She was dying. You do know what that means, don't you?" He blinked. "That she gets to live." The medic shook her head slowly. "No, human. That means she belongs to you now. By firebond law, Jarn didn't understand. Not yet. But above him, in the heavens beyond the cloud line, the stars had already begun to shift. And far within the cryo chamber, even in unconsciousness, Avarai's fingertips curled, subconsciously drawn toward the man who'd defied death itself to save her. A fire had been lit, one that neither of them could yet see. But it would burn, and it would change everything. Avarai Virelai awoke to a sound she did not recognize. Stillness. No hum of Empire-class engines, no soft chant of her house's ritual whispers, no scent of incense, of burning jasmine leaf and ancestral stone, only sterile air, too dry, too clean. Her breath hitched. She was not on a Virelai ship. A pale, glowing panel floated above her. Unfamiliar script, Terran standard, her lips curled, human tech. She flexed her fingers instinctively, then winced. Pain bloomed in her ribs. Her left arm was bandaged from shoulder to wrist, but something deeper burned beneath it. The heat, the moment before the crash, and his arms. A human had carried her. Memory returned in shards. The battlefield. Fire. The man's face, rough, defiant, mud-streaked, and desperate. A voice that had spoken, not in reverence, but resolve. Why had he saved her? She tried to sit up, but a thin metallic band pulsed around her wrist. A med cuff, monitoring vitals. Not restraining, but she felt the weight of something much heavier. A pull in her chest. Ancient. Binding. The door hissed. He walked in, taller than she remembered, wearing a pilot's half-jacket, sleeves torn, one arm in a sling. His eyes met hers, and for a moment neither moved. You're awake, Jarn said. His voice was rough but calm. You're human, she answered flatly. He smirked. Last I checked. Silence again. Then she whispered, You saved me. He nodded. Didn't know who you were. Her voice dropped. You touched me. Jarn frowned. Yeah, you were dying. No, she said coldly. You touched me, while the fire still clung to me. That makes it binding. What? She leaned forward slowly, golden eyes locked on him. You've firebonded me, Terran. Jarn stared, uncomprehending. I just pulled you out of wreckage. To you, that's rescue. To my people, it's union. When one touches a Virelai noble during the fire death trial and survives the flame, the soul marks fuse. Wait, are you saying... You've claimed me. By ancient law, I now belong to you. She said it like venom, like she was spitting blood. Jarn stood frozen. I didn't choose that. Nor did I. She turned her head away, jaw clenched. He saw it then. A faint, glowing sigil pulsing behind her ear. A twin brand shimmered just beneath his own collarbone, unnoticed until now, warm and aching. Firebond. The word landed between them, like a blade. Later, as the med station lights dimmed to artificial dusk, Avarai sat staring at the void, through a sealed viewport. Jarn stood outside her chamber, fists clenched. Two strangers, one accidental bond, and a war-torn galaxy that would not forgive a noble pairing with a human. They would fight it, they would resent it. But the bond was forged, and deep in their marrow the fire was stirring. Jarn stood at the edge of the observation deck, the stars beyond smeared like spilled light across the cold black. His fingers grazed the new mark on his chest, an elegant brand, curling like fire-forged script. It pulsed softly, as if alive, as if watching. He didn't believe in fate. He didn't believe in magic, either. But now, he bore both. Behind him the door opened with a hiss. She shouldn't be walking yet, said Dr. Keir, the med officer. Burn trauma's still stabilizing. She's not human, Jarn muttered. She'll walk if she wants. Keir hesitated. And what about the bond? You seen this before? No. Pause. But she has. Avarai Virelai stood in the central hall of the Terran outpost ship Talon's Reach, wrapped in a long robe of gray medical cloth. Beneath it, ceremonial sigils had begun to ink themselves into her skin. She stared at a holographic panel, flicking through ancient Virelai texts, translated poorly into human tongue. Her breath was calm, but her core burned. Do you even know what this means? She said sharply, without turning. Jarn crossed his arms. You keep saying I claimed you, but I didn't ask for any of this. That's the nature of the firebond. She turned now, eyes fierce. It is not a choice, it's a reaction, a ritual so old it's written into our blood. He studied her. So what now? You're my... what, alien bride? Her jaw tightened. Do not mock this. Then help me understand it. She stepped closer. You touched me in the flames. My body was in trial. That moment the fire was meant to consume me if I was unworthy. You interfered. Jarn's voice dropped. I saved your life. Yes. Her gaze softened slightly. And now your life is entwined with mine. She tapped a node on the wall. A hologram flickered into view. A Virelai archive. Gold script danced midair. When fire and flesh are one, the bond ignites. The outsider who survives the flame must be honored or destroyed. Jarn blinked. Destroyed? Avarai nodded. My people will not accept this bond unless it is fulfilled, which means a rite, a joining, public, sacred, irreversible. And if I say no? She paused. The noble houses will demand your death, or mine. They stared at each other. Two enemies. Now bound by an ancient law no one had meant to invoke. Then, almost gently, Jarn asked, Did it hurt? What? The fire, when I touched you. Avarai's eyes dropped for the first time. "Yes," she whispered, "but not like before." Later that night, alone in her chamber, Avarai reached up to her collarbone, where a faint warmth pulsed like a heartbeat, not her own. She closed her eyes. Once she had been told that a firebond either broke you or remade you. She had never believed that. Until now. The Talon's reach hung silent in orbit over a crimson moon. Outside, meteor dust whispered across the hull, like dry rain. Inside, the tension was thick as welded steel. Jarn sat alone in the armory. Not a place for rest, a place for decision. On the table before him lay an alien ceremonial blade, curved, slender, and humming softly, like it breathed. The handle was woven of obsidian threads and wrapped in something that looked alarmingly like skin. It was called a Virelai, a bond blade. He had read the file twice, then again, and it still didn't make sense. "Why does this look more like an execution weapon than a marriage ring?" he muttered. From the doorway, a voice answered, "Because in our culture they are the same thing." Avarai stood there, no longer in a robe, but in formal armor, lightweight, gleaming like black oil, with living patterns that shifted across her torso. Her hair was braided back in the Virelai warrior style, a crown of thorns around a core of gold. "I didn't come here for war," Jarn said. "No," she replied, walking toward the blade. "But you've been dragged into one nonetheless." She picked it up with reverence. "On my world, a bond must be sealed by a right of choosing," she said. "You stand weaponless. I offer you the blade. You may take it and swear the firebond, or you may refuse and invoke the trial." "Trial? You fight me," he scoffed. "You want me to fight you?" "Not want. The law requires it." "And what happens if I lose?" "You still bind to me." A breath. "If you win, I walk away." Jarn stared at her. "That's not much of a choice." She held out the blade. "It is the only one we have." His hand hovered. "And if I take this and swear?" "Then the bond is accepted. You'll be protected under Virelai law. You'll have status, a name among our kind." Her voice softened. "You'll be mine." He closed his hand around the blade. The hum intensified, like a heartbeat echoing into his skin. For a moment the deck shimmered. A flicker of red flame danced from his fingertips, and the blade fused to him, like it had always belonged there. "I don't know what this means," he said. "You don't have to yet," Avarai replied. He looked up. "But I'm not going to run." A faint smile curved her lips. "Then let the stars bear witness." Later, in the lower sanctum of the ship, beneath the glow of alien runes and old Terran steel, they stood before the firekeeper. The rite was performed in silence. Jarn raised the blade. Avarai pressed her hand to his chest, just over the mark. They didn't speak. They didn't have to. Their eyes did all the talking. At the end of it, the bond wasn't just spiritual. It was visible. A burning thread shimmered between their wrists, like a tether of light. Not shackles, not chains. Something far more dangerous. A promise. Outside, the stars didn't care. But somewhere deep inside the ship, two hearts beat in rhythm now, and neither of them would admit how afraid they were of what came next. The firebond shimmered like a vein of living light between them. It pulsed from Jarn's wrist to Avarai's with a rhythm too intimate, too real. No chain, no weight, and yet heavier than any armor he'd ever worn. He hadn't expected it to ache. The days after the bonding ceremony passed like breath held underwater. Every corridor of the Talon's reach now felt watched. The Virelai crew treated him with an uneasy mix of deference and distance, their eyes flicking to the firebond like it might explode. And Avarai, she was both closer and more unreachable than ever. They trained together in the ship's lower chamber, a place of echoing stone and curved walls etched with ancestral light. Ancient Virelai inscriptions glowed faintly, whispering wisdom. Only she could read. Jarn ducked under a sweep of her blade and came up spinning, sweat stinging his eyes. "You hesitate," she said, voice like chilled steel. He blocked, barely, "because I don't want to hurt you." Her strike cracked the air between them. "Then you've already lost." After the sparring, they sat in the afterglow of exhaustion. Not speaking, not touching, just watching the bond flicker between their wrists like a nervous heartbeat. "Is this how it's supposed to feel?" he asked quietly. Avarai looked at him, then away. "The bond amplifies what we suppress, not just strength, but doubt." "And you're doubting this?" "I'm doubting me." Later, Jarn stood alone in his quarters, staring out at the bleeding starscape. The firebond curled like a brand across his skin, faint but ever present. He remembered pulling her from that wreckage on Ravith Prime, her blood staining his chest, her breath rattling as he shouted for a medic. He hadn't known her name then, only her eyes. Now he was tied to her by alien law, and maybe something else too. He touched the bond. It flared warm. He didn't hear her enter. "I can feel when your thoughts shift," she said softly behind him. "The bond tugs." He turned. "You can feel me thinking?" "No, not the thoughts, just the storm behind them." For the first time since the ceremony, she stepped close. Not like a commander, not like a warrior, like someone who wasn't sure how to be seen. "I was never meant to bond," she whispered. "Not to anyone. I was promised to the Starsong line, a match of power, not this." He stared at her. "Then why didn't you walk away?" A pause. Her voice cracked, just a little. "Because you ran into fire for me, and no one ever has." The silence stretched, thick as starlight. Jarn reached up and brushed a strand of her hair behind her ear. "It wasn't a choice," he said. She looked up at him. "That's the first honest thing either of us has said." And when she turned to leave, the firebond pulled, just slightly, as if it didn't want to let go. Neither did he. The Talon's reach drifted in orbit around the dusk-blue moon of Altheris, bathing the observation deck in light, the color of bruises. It was quiet there, quiet in a way that made Jarn's skin itch, like the ship itself was holding its breath. Jarn leaned against the cool alloy wall, firebond dim around his wrist, barely pulsing. But even at its faintest, he felt her. Not in some mystical way. Not yet. But in a thread of breath when she entered a room. In the way gravity itself tilted when Avarai was near. He tried to ignore it. Instead, he read. Ancient Virelai law, translated into clumsy human dialects. He'd found it in the ship's archives, buried beneath layers of ceremonial codex and flickering holograms. Article 117A, Section 6R. In the act of firebond, consent is sealed, not in voice, but in return of flame. The touch must be chosen, the response freely given. Jarn swallowed hard. There hadn't been a response. At the ceremony she hadn't touched his flame with her own. Only the priestess had sealed it, a forced connection. Beautiful, but false. He found her in the Star Dome garden. Virelai flora shimmered with a faint bioluminescence, blue vines curling like breath trails in zero-G. She didn't look at him when he entered. You found the codex. He blinked. You knew? A nod. I knew you would. You're a soldier. You read maps, even the ones meant to trap you. He approached slowly. It says, if the flame wasn't returned, then the bond isn't real. It exists, she said, just not as it should, not as our ancestors intended. So I could walk away? Finally, she looked at him. And it wasn't anger in her eyes. It was sorrow. Bone deep. The kind that wraps around memory like rust on steel. You could, but it wouldn't unburn what we've already scorched. He stepped forward, the soft blue vines brushing his boots. Why didn't you return the flame, Avarai? She didn't speak for a long moment, and when she did, her voice was smoke and iron. Because I was afraid, he blinked. Of what? That I wanted it. The quiet cracked like a shell. Jarn reached out, hesitantly. His fingers hovered just above her wrist, where the firebond curled like a sleeping snake. You still can, he whispered. She looked down. No priestess, no law, just you, just me. And slowly, deliberately, Avarai placed her hand over his, not as command, not as ritual, but as choice. The bond flared, sudden and hot, not blinding but honest, a heartbeat made visible, no longer imposed, returned. Later, alone in his cabin, Jarn stared at the golden glow, weaving faintly around his fingers. It wasn't brighter, but it was real now. And somehow that changed everything. The morning cycle on the Talon's reach should have been calm. Quiet engines, hum of life support, the scent of spiced recaf brewing in the galley. But Jarn woke to red light flashing across his cabin wall. Internal security breach. Deck 3, not a drill. His fingers curled instinctively toward the pulse pistol tucked under his bunk. But the real heat wasn't in his hand. It was crawling under his skin. A thrumming, deep and wrong, Avarai. She wasn't in her quarters, not in the library, not in the Stardom Gardens, where her silence used to live. He found her on Deck 3, barefoot and bleeding, her back pressed against the wall of the cryogenics chamber. A faint gash traced her temple. Pale strands of her hair stuck to her cheek. Her violet robe was torn at the shoulder, a pattern of crushed fireflies embroidered in gold, now smudged with blood. But she wasn't afraid. She looked furious. 2 intruders lay sprawled on the floor. Virelai saboteurs, cloaked in exile armor, faces hidden behind shattered bone masks. Jarn didn't know how they'd breached the ship's shields, but he knew what they wanted. Her. They hadn't come to kill. They'd come to reclaim her. Avarai's voice was steady, but her breath trembled. They spoke the rite of severance. Jarn stared. You mean, they've branded me Firefallen, she said, almost like a confession. To bond with an outsider? It's considered desecration. Jarn's throat clenched. You knew this might happen. I hoped it wouldn't. Her smile was bitter. But hope is for children and fools. He stepped between her and the unconscious saboteurs. They came for you. No, she said. They came for us. That was when the second wave hit. The ship rocked violently, an impact against the outer hull, not from within, from a docking clamp, unauthorized. Jarn could see it now in the terminal feed. A stealth vessel, no registry, no lights, a retrieval team. They barely made it to the command deck in time. Alarms wailed as containment doors sealed and atmospheric levels dropped in compromised corridors. Commander Orel barked orders, but her voice sounded hollow, like she knew they were already too late. Then the holo display flickered. An alien face bloomed into view, pale eyes like cracked moonstone, his ceremonial robes black as void. Highvire Consul Vaynor. Avarai went still. Daughter of Flame, the consul said, voice oozing like cold sap. You were not taken, you strayed, and now you will return. I have chosen, she replied, chin raised, and choice is older than your crown. Vaynor didn't blink. You have 1 hour to surrender, or we breach the hull and retrieve what is ours. The comlink went dead. The silence afterward was heavy. Jarn turned to her. We can run. Punch through the asteroid belt, hit FTL before they can lock coordinates. She looked at him, eyes wild with 100 emotions. But the strongest? Regret. No, Jarn. If we run, they'll follow us. And next time, they won't come with masks, They'll come with fire." He didn't ask what she meant, because deep down, he knew. This wasn't just a story of love. It was becoming a war. Jarn could feel the ship's engines groan beneath him, as if the Talon's reach were no longer just a vessel, but a beast, sensing the weight of an incoming storm. The alarms had silenced, but the tension didn't fade. His mind raced, yet everything slowed, as if time itself had stretched thin, like the seconds between a heartbeat before the world shatters. Avarai stood beside him, her eyes fixed on the viewport, where the dark void of space consumed the edges of the ship's hull. Her hand brushed against the terminal, eyes scanning for any sign of escape. The plan had to be simple: stealth, speed, and survival. But in the back of her gaze was something darker. A storm of memories. "Are you listening?" Jarn asked, a pulse of frustration slipping into his tone. "We need to move, now!" "I know," she replied, her voice distant, almost robotic. But it was the quiet in her voice that made Jarn hesitate. Before he could press her for more, the comm system blinked alive again. The chillingly familiar cold gaze of the high Vire console Vaynor filled the holoscreen, his face half obscured by the shadow of the flickering transmission. His presence still haunted her, like a shackle that had been placed around her soul, one that she could neither break nor escape. "I gave you a chance to return peacefully." The console's voice was sharp, laced with ice. "But now, you will be retrieved." Avarai's fingers clenched into fists, her knuckles cracking with the tension. She stared at the image, as if the very sight of it could burn her alive. Jarn could feel the weight of the moment, as the console's presence filled the space between them. There was no way to hide from it. Avarai had been born from this, and every corner of her was bound by the fire of her people. He couldn't pull her away, not now, not like this. He was bound too, in his own way, but not by fire. "You don't know what you're doing, Consul," she said, her voice low but steel cold. "I will not return." The Consul's eyes narrowed. "You do not choose. Your blood was never meant for this human. Your place, your destiny lies in the flame, in the unity of the Vire people." Jarn stepped forward, fists clenched, but Avarai held up a hand, stopping him. She wasn't looking at the Consul anymore. She was looking beyond him. She was looking at something else. The ship's hull shuddered. The warning came too late. A sickeningly metallic clang echoed throughout the ship, followed by a violent jolt. The Talon's reach jerked to the side, the force sending them both crashing to the floor, but neither of them made a sound. "They've breached the outer doors," Avarai murmured. Jarn's instincts kicked in. "Get to the aft hatch. We can make it to the escape pods." "No!" Avarai cut him off. Her gaze was steady now, her body trembling with purpose. "You don't understand. The Consul's orders have already been carried out. The Vire don't retreat." Her lips parted slightly, and for a moment she appeared to be far away. "They will come for me. And for you." She wasn't talking about just the soldiers. Jarn felt the weight of it sink into his chest. His heart thudded painfully against his ribs. She wasn't just talking about the Consul's orders. She was talking about the firebond. It was an ancient law, a Vire law, a blood law. It wasn't just about returning her to the Consul. It was about the fire that had been kindled when she had chosen him. In her culture, a bond like theirs was seen as a violation of the very nature of the Vire's traditions. To sever the firebond meant to sever her very being. It was not simply a refusal to marry. It was a refusal of existence itself. Jarn looked at her, eyes wide with realization. She was willing to die rather than return. Her people's laws were steeped in ritual. Firebonding wasn't just about joining souls. It was about the unification of two flames into one eternal fire. But to sever that fire? The cost was too high. She would burn alive from the inside out before she allowed herself to become the consul's puppet. But the Vyre consul wasn't willing to let her burn. "We need to destroy the tracking beacon," Avarai said, cutting through the silence like a blade. "Before they can trace us to the outer rim." Jarn shook his head. "It's too late. They're already here." Another blast rattled the ship. The docking clamps had activated. The Vyre warship had locked onto them. But then Avarai did something that stopped Jarn dead in his tracks. She placed her hand against the terminal, drawing a deep breath. Her eyes closed, the flame within her lighting up with a force that made the air itself seem to crackle. And then, with a sharp command, she sent a message. Not to the consul, but to someone else. The transmission crackled to life, and Jarn felt his blood run cold. The voice that came through was not Vyre, but Virelai, the rebel faction that had sworn to overthrow the consul's iron rule. "You are not alone, Avarai," the voice said, thick with resistance and fire. "The flame runs deeper than you think." Jarn's pulse quickened. "What does that mean?" Avarai didn't answer him. Instead, she began to move, her face now set in stone. She turned toward the blast doors leading to the bridge. "I won't run, Jarn," she said, her voice steady. "But I won't face this alone." The ship lurched again as more Vyre soldiers cut through the corridors. Jarn didn't hesitate anymore. He followed her, side by side, as the crew scrambled to prepare for a battle. They couldn't win. Avarai's eyes glowed with the fire of her people, but it was different now, brighter. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about reclaiming what was rightfully hers. What was theirs? Outside, in the cold void of space, the Vyre warship waited, the consul's fleet. But now, they were not the only ones playing their hand. A dark storm was coming. And it wasn't just the consul's will, that was about to be unleashed. The Talon's reach was no longer a sanctuary. It was a battleground, a crumbling fortress of steel and desperation. The warship's corridors pulsed with the rhythmic sounds of heavy footsteps, the hum of weapons charging, and the frantic scurry of the crew, preparing for the worst. The lights flickered in time, with the adrenaline flooding Jarn's veins, casting shadows that seemed to reach out with hungry fingers, desperate for the next victim. Jarn's breath came in shallow gasps. As he sprinted down the hallway, Avarai's figure just ahead of him, a silhouette framed by the flickering lights. Her face was resolute, but he could feel the weight of something darker, something heavier, pressing down on her. The closer they got to the engine room, the clearer it became. They weren't just running from the Vyre soldiers. They were running from something far more dangerous. "Jarn, keep up," she called, her voice sharp and steady, despite the chaos around them. Her eyes flicked back briefly, a fleeting glimpse of uncertainty passing between them, before she turned back to the path ahead. "We need to disable the core before they can breach it." Jarn's heart hammered in his chest, but he nodded. He didn't need to understand every step of her plan. He just needed to trust her. It had taken him days, weeks even, to fully grasp the depth of her resolve. But now, with the consul's fleet closing in on them, he saw it with perfect clarity. Avarai wasn't just fighting for survival. She was fighting for everything she had ever known, for the fire that burned within her soul, the fire that connected her to a past she couldn't escape. And now she was asking him to stand with her. The door to the engine room slid open with a hiss, revealing a scene of controlled chaos. Sparks flew from exposed wires, and the air hummed with the tension of unstable energy, crackling in the air, like 1,000 volts waiting to be unleashed. The engine itself was a marvel of alien technology, a pulsing core of fire that seemed to breathe with its own rhythm. It was the heart of the ship, a vessel that would burn just as fiercely as the fire within Avarai's chest. Avarai stepped forward, her steps deliberate, her body moving like water through the storm. But there was a new fire in her eyes. It wasn't just the Vyre she was fighting anymore. It was something deeper. She was fighting for her freedom, for a future that hadn't been dictated by the Consul, for a life she could call her own. "You know what to do," she said, her voice quiet but firm, as she gestured toward the control terminal. Jarn's fingers moved with practiced ease, though his mind was far from the task at hand. His thoughts were wrapped around her, around the weight of what she had been forced to carry, and the way her heart had been trapped in the flames of a culture that would rather see her burn than live free. A sudden jolt from the ship made him stumble, but he caught himself, glaring up at the monitor. The Consul's forces were here. The Vyre were closing in faster than they had anticipated. But there was something else. Something more. The comms had crackled to life a few moments ago, and Jarn had caught a snippet of something important. The holographic screen flickered before him, the image of the Consul's face smirking with cruel satisfaction. His voice, cold and indifferent, cut through the air like a blade. "You cannot escape, Avarai. You were born to be mine. Your fire is mine." Jarn's fists clenched, but Avarai remained unnervingly calm, her gaze never leaving the terminal. "We'll see about that," she whispered, almost to herself. The room seemed to darken with each passing second, the weight of the Consul's words settling into Jarn's bones. He wanted to strike back, to unleash everything he had on this man who had forced Avarai into this corner, but the reality was harsh. They didn't have time for vengeance. They needed to win. They needed to escape. Avarai's voice broke through his spiraling thoughts. "Jarn, focus. We don't have much time." Jarn snapped back to the present. His fingers moved over the controls, eyes flicking over the schematics of the ship's energy core. It wasn't just a simple shutdown they needed. It was a complete disintegration of the core's systems, a temporary destabilization that would trigger an overload. It would create just enough of a window to get them to the escape pods, but the explosion from the core would be devastating. It would be their only chance. As he input the final command, a sudden tremor ran through the ship, knocking him off balance. The lights flickered and then went out entirely, plunging them into darkness. A deep rumble reverberated through the walls, like the heartbeat of a beast, preparing to unleash its fury. "We're too late," Jarn muttered, heart pounding in his chest. "No," Avarai said, her voice unshaken as she pressed a hand to the console, her pulse syncing with the rhythm of the ship's energy core. "We're right on time." The door to the engine room exploded open with a violent crash, and the first wave of Vyre soldiers poured in, their weapons raised. But Avarai was ready. In one fluid motion, she pulled a small device from her belt and activated it with a sharp twist. The energy core reacted instantly, the ship shuddering violently as the destabilizing forces kicked in. A bright flash of light erupted from the core, blinding them both momentarily. The Vyre soldiers screamed in shock and pain as the blast knocked them back, but Avarai was already moving. She grabbed Jarn's arm, pulling him toward the AFT escape hatch with a force that made his breath catch in his throat. They had no time to waste. The ship was coming apart at the seams. The explosion from the core was imminent, and they needed to be gone before it consumed them both. The escape pods were only a few corridors away, but the blast had made the path treacherous. Sparks exploded from the walls as the ship's systems began to fail. The rumbling grew louder, and Jarn could hear the distant thundering of the Vyre fleet closing in. They were running out of time. Avarai's hand tightened around his wrist as they sprinted through the wreckage. There was no room for fear, no space for doubt, only the fire that burned between them and the fire that would soon consume the Talon's reach. Just as they reached the final door, Jarn glanced at her. Her face was streaked with soot, but her eyes, those eyes, were unrelenting, burning with a fierce resolve. "Jarn," she said, her voice a whisper amidst the chaos. "I have to tell you something." Before he could respond, the escape pod's hatch slid open, and the ground beneath them buckled. The world went silent. Avarai stood on the edge of the balcony, gazing at the vast expanse of the cosmos that stretched beyond. The stars seemed to pulse with a life of their own, like the rhythm of her heart. The firebond, that had once seemed like a curse, had now become something unspoken, yet undeniable. She had feared this connection, dreaded the unbreakable tie that Jarn's life-saving act had forced upon her. But now she wasn't so sure. She had wanted freedom, to walk away, to escape the weight of a bond forged by ancient law. Yet, with every step she took away from Jarn, something in her heart pulled her back. He had never claimed her. He never wanted her, like the suitors who had come before. But somewhere, in the silence of their shared spaces, in the quiet moments when their eyes met and their souls touched, she had come to realize that it wasn't the law that mattered, but the love they had found despite it. The hum of the ship, the only sound besides the soft whisper of the wind, surrounded her. She closed her eyes, taking a deep breath. The scent of firestone filled her lungs, the same one Jarn had gifted her. It was more than a symbol now. It was a promise. A sound behind her broke her reverie. She turned to find Jarn, standing in the doorway, his face a mixture of hesitation and resolve. The way he looked at her had changed. It was no longer just the look of a man bound by fate. There was a depth to his gaze now, a love that had been forged in the heart of the flame they had both shared, a love that was neither one of law nor duty, but of choice. "I thought you might be here," he said softly, his voice carrying the weight of all the things he had never said aloud. She looked at him, feeling the firestone in her hand, the weight of it a reminder of everything they had been through. "I thought you'd leave," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. He shook his head slowly, taking a step toward her. "I'm not leaving. Not now, not ever." The tension between them had always been thick, but now it was different. There was no fear, no uncertainty, just truth, just love. He reached out, gently taking her hand in his, the warmth of his touch sending a surge of energy through her. She looked up into his eyes, and for the first time in what felt like forever, she allowed herself to believe in what they had become. "Jarn," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. "I never thought I'd feel like this. Never thought I'd want this." He smiled, a soft, almost apologetic smile. "You didn't have to," he said, his thumb brushing her knuckles. "I never wanted you to feel forced into anything." Her eyes softened, and for the first time she smiled back. "I know, and I didn't understand it then. I was afraid." "Of what?" he asked, his voice low and comforting. "Of being owned, of being a possession," she confessed, her gaze dropping to their joined hands. "But this feels different." "It's not ownership," he said firmly. "It's partnership, equality, a bond between two souls who choose each other." Avarai felt the truth in his words, felt the bond between them shift, settle into something stronger, more real than the ancient traditions that had once bound them. The heart of the flame they shared wasn't born from law, but from understanding, respect, and love. She took a deep breath, letting the warmth of their connection fill her. I think I'm ready." "Ready for what?" Jarn asked, his voice thick with emotion. "To be with you," she said, her voice steady now, no hesitation. To choose you, not because I have to, but because I want to. Jarn's expression softened, and he pulled her into a tender embrace. The firestone, still warm between them, symbolized not just their past, but their future. Together. Chosen. Free. As they stood there, wrapped in each other's arms, the stars outside the ship shimmered brighter. The fire, that had once felt like a trap, had now become the light that guided them forward. For the first time, Avarai no longer feared the fire. She had become it, and it had become her. And together they would burn brightly, unstoppable and unwavering,